Ohio State back in that spot where it seems like the only team you can compare them to is themselves. Here's how they stand up against the best Big Ten offenses this century, which in a strange twist is all Buckeyes teams, outpacing their prior bests in scoring, total offense, and yards per play. And as you can see, that yards per play won by a significant margin. Let's welcome in a guy who knows Ohio State quite well. Has been covering him for years, Doug Lesmerises from Cleveland.com. And Doug, I don't know if you could see that graphic, but I'll outline it for you. Basically, it was that Ohio State is not only the best in the Big Ten this year in terms of a lot of offensive numbers, but the best anyone's been in the Big Ten this century, ahead of a number of other Ohio State teams. How would you compare this Buckeye team to some of the other great offenses that you have seen?
I think the collection of skill guys is as good as we've seen, because when you add in Trevion Henderson as a freshman running back, who is as dynamic, I think, as any running back in the country, and you add the leap that Jackson Smith-Njigba has made as a second-year receiver in the slot, he has more receiving yards than Chris Olave this year, which is amazing. And we knew Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson were great. And I also do think that this offensive line is about as good as I've seen at Ohio State. So then all we were waiting for is the quarterback to tie all that together. And the way CJ Stroud has played in his last few games with confidence and poise, seeing the field, throwing accurately, he is tying all that together. But the other 10 always were, even for Ohio State, like really good across the board. You just didn't know because they didn't have a quarterback who'd ever thrown a pass before this season.
Yeah, the CJ thing is really interesting. The day we were at camp, I assume you were at camp too, because all the media was there. And that was the day, if you recall, he threw like 2 passes. And then they moved him to the side and they were working on his shoulder. And Ryan had to come over afterward and kind of say, hey, it was a planned rest day. It wasn't a big deal. But I think it was obvious to those of us who were there that there was something going on. You kind of don't do that when all of the media is assembled unless there's something happening there. Is it your sense, with what you can glean, that whatever the issue is now behind him?
I think maybe CJ got caught in a vortex a little bit of my shoulder hurts. Now I'm wondering about my shoulder. Now I'm wondering about my shoulder. Now I'm maybe not making the throws I could make, even if it's not all the shoulder, right? That I'm not saying he wasn't nursing something. He certainly was. He certainly wasn't 100%. But he also was a young quarterback who I think was struggling to figure out, how do you play through that? What is something that's limiting? What is okay? And to take the week where he did not play against Akron, it obviously rested his shoulder. I think it also gave him a mental reset. And both of those were needed. And now we see the real CJ Stroud. And the real CJ Stroud looks in complete control with all these options he has. But again, this is a guy who did not throw a pass last year. It's his first year playing college football, and he looks this smooth. It's a great credit to him, but I do think he's past the shoulder, but he's also past thinking about the shoulder, and I think both were holding him back in the first month.
The defense was clearly the biggest story at the beginning of the year because it was in a bit of a crisis. So now you have Matt Barnes calling the signals. Is it your sense, from what you've been able to glean, that he is completely in charge of the defense? Like, is he the defensive coordinator? Because obviously part of being the defensive coordinator is setting the game plan, setting the scheme, all of those things. And then part of it is on game day calling the signals. It's clear he's doing the latter. Is he doing the former too, or is it some sort of collaborative effort, or are we not able to determine that?
You said the magic word. Coaches love that collaboration word, right? Everybody's always collaborating. And then we're always like, well, who makes the decisions? Doesn't someone make a decision? They are collaborating. They're giving a lot of credit to Larry Johnson and his work in the run game as a really veteran, obviously high-level defensive line coach. And then Kerry Combs and Al Washington are still involved. But I do think 2 things have happened. One is Matt Barnes is in control on Saturday, but also Ryan Day as the head coach was the guy who really was very interested in running this single high safety look that they ran with Jeff Hafley in Ryan Day's first year in 2019. And when they hired Kerry Combs and he was the defensive coordinator last year, they wanted to run that as well. They're away from that now. They have Ronnie Hickman back as a second deep safety on a lot of snaps. He can slide into the box at times too, but they made sort of a basic schematic adjustment that it wasn't Kerry Combs was set on single high safety. That was what Ryan Day wanted to do. So Ryan Day, I think, also let something go there that needed to be let go of. And now I do think Matt Barnes is making the calls on Saturday. I do think Matt Barnes has the loudest voice in that room. But it's not just the guy. It's that the head coach, I think, was willing to allow whoever was calling the defense to make that shift. And I think that's been as important as changing the play caller.
That's really interesting to me because one of the things we talked a lot about in those days following the Oregon loss was the fact that this was really the first crisis for Ryan Day as a head coach. I mean, everything had gone pretty smoothly when you make the playoff in consecutive years, had a couple bumps in the road here and there, but nothing that had come close to approaching what we're seeing right here. How have you seen him grow into this role as a head coach and maybe using that crisis that we saw this year as kind of a touch point on that?
It was interesting. Ryan Day, with some of the NFL background he has, and again, he's a college guy at heart, but he was in the NFL for a few years. He was talking a lot in August about like, hey, in college, man, one loss can ruin your season. And sort of like in the NFL, that's not how it is. You can lose and still have all your goals in front of you. So he was undefeated in the regular season, but it was almost like he was knowing he knew he wasn't going to go undefeated in his whole college career as a head coach. And he knew that was coming. And we could see him anticipate it. Remember, Urban Meyer started off 24-0 at Ohio State, right? It was very similar to that. So I do think the fact that he made a change, and that's not easy, right? He hired Kerry Combs. He's friends with Kerry Combs. That he actually made a change at defensive play caller, which I didn't think was assumed at all. And that he also completely stood behind CJ Stroud and stuck with him and very publicly supported him, that he made one change and didn't at all think about making another change. And it feels like both those choices have worked out. He has a good mix, I think, of leadership, but he allows himself to be emotional in the locker room. He was leading the guys jumping around on the field last week. I think he has a good handle on the culture and the emotion of this team. But I thought those were two very specific head coach choices that he had to make, and it seems like he made the right call with both.
Doug, one last question for you. I mentioned with Jerry a little while ago, I mean, this game has lost a bit of its luster with Penn State, just given how the Nittany Lions have played the last couple of times out. But what do you think you can learn about Ohio State on Saturday?
It feels like watching this team sometimes that Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith-Njigba are open by 5 yards on every play. And it's like, hey, that's a nice throw by CJ Stroud, but he was open by 5 yards. I really like Joey Porter Jr. and Tariq Castro-Fields at corner for Penn State. I think Jaquan Brisker, everybody does, is one of the smartest, most instinctual playmaking safeties, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. I think maybe the receivers won't be open by 5 yards. Not that they won't be open, but it'll be tighter. I'm really curious how CJ Stroud, that maybe cat and mouse game with Brisker, who I think might try to bait him into some stuff, try to make some plays. And then I do think Porter Jr. and Castro Fields will be closer to the Ohio State receivers than any corners we've seen so far. So CJ Stroud has been great the last couple weeks. If he's great again against this Penn State secondary, then we really, I think, remove almost any doubts about what kind of player CJ Stroud is this year.
Doug, great stuff. Really appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Back on Big Ten today, and congratulations to Michigan's Aidan Hutchinson, one of 3 Big Ten players named yesterday as a finalist for the Campbell Trophy, which is known as the Academic Heisman, an honor that comes with an $18,000 postgraduate scholarship. Amazingly, Aidan's father, Chris, who is now a physician, was similarly honored back in 1992, just the second father-son duo ever to earn that distinction. And Aidan Hutchinson joins us now. He is today's big interview. And Aidan, let's start there. Congratulations. What does that honor mean to you?
Yeah, thank you. It's a true honor, just to know that my dad won it as well. I mean, it's so cool to have this father-son duo, and we're both finalists for this award. And I think it goes to show, how he taught me when I was growing up, and just the way I was raised, and I give a lot of props to him in that regard. So I'm super grateful for having my mom and dad to raise me the way I was.
A pretty good gene pool. It's carried over to the football field as well. You are having a fabulous year. Give us a sense for the anticipation you feel this week. Like, are you able to focus on other stuff, or do you just kind of go through this week with this game kind of constantly somewhere in your mind?
Yeah, I think the old me would be very distracted, would be very caught up in the moment with this game, because it is a really big game. But this year, you know, I'm taking every game with a grain of salt. You know, I know my ability. I know what I can do on the field. It doesn't matter who I line up against. I'm just going to play my ball. I'm going to play how I play. So I'm really preparing, you know, the same way I do for every game, and I'm just ready to get out there and play him on Saturday.
What's the vibe like in the facility this week?
I would say everyone's a little bit more locked in than usual. You know, it's probably the biggest game we're gonna have so far, and it's just so big. And I think we've made a great game plan. We've been preparing all week. Practices have been great. It's really all you can ask for leading up to this game. And, you know, now we just got to go out there, execute what we learned, and get that win.
You were quoted this week as saying beating Michigan State is, quote, a requirement. What does this matchup against the Spartans mean to you?
It means everything. You know, playing them, being a Michigan fan my whole life, growing up here, you live the rivalry every single day. You know, I got friends that are Michigan State fans. This in-state rivalry is just is so huge, especially growing up in Michigan. So, you know, that's why I said winning this game is a requirement, because you get bragging rights for about a year until you guys play each other again, and you know, you'll see what happens then. But you know, this game is for bragging rights.
I want to get into some of the X's and O's, particularly the improvement of your defense. I mean, you are second in the nation now in scoring defense. You were 95th last year. Now, you were hurt, so that's part of it. But what else do you attribute this improvement on that side of the ball to?
Yeah, I think Coach Mack and the staff that he brought in have been doing a tremendous job on our defense, and I think, you know, really the guys are just executing what they're telling us, and you know, that's leading to a lot of success. Still, there's a ton of things we can clean up, and we can really be that elite defense if we clean up just those couple plays, little things in a game. But I think so far we are 7-0. I mean, that's all you can ask for. We're winning ball games, so we're happy. Defense is playing well, and we're going to continue to do that.
You mentioned Coach McDonald. I want to talk to you a bit about Coach Harbaugh, and I think there's been this perception from those outside the program that he seems different in some way this year. To what extent do you believe that's true?
I believe it's true. I mean, we're 7-0. We're undefeated so far. So, you know, every coach in the building is a little bit happier. You know, it's always really good vibes when you're winning, and you know, I think he keeps that similar kind of that mindset even when we lose a couple games, because it happens. Obviously, we don't plan on it, but yeah, he's been great this season, and you know, a different energy definitely in Schembechler Hall, and kind of a revived culture, I would say, and you know, guys just want to go out there and win ball games for each other. You know, I think that's the biggest difference. You know, that this team looks like is. You know, we're just playing for each other. We want to do this for the guy next to you, and it's been great.
I mentioned that you were a Campbell Trophy finalist off the top. You're on another list, too, that's published every year in the preseason, and that is Bruce Feldman's Freaks list. You were number 2 on that list, and again, it kind of speaks to guys who have amazing weight room accomplishments and just gifted athletes. What is the accomplishment in the weight room that you are most proud of?
Me being 6'6", about 265, and the way that I can move on that field, I don't think many people can do that. And I think that's what separates me from a lot of players in the country, because you take a 6'6" kid, you'd think he'd be not so nimble on the field, or not so quick and have that burst. But I think that's what separates me from other DNs that may be my size, is just my ability to move, my ability to turn the corner, all that stuff. And I think really that's what separates me.
I mentioned your dad, Chris, off the top. I remember him as a player. He's more a contemporary of mine, and he was a fabulous player in his own right, and of course a huge star at Michigan. I mentioned now a physician, but you taped a sign on your wall when you were a kid growing up that said, "I will play football at the University of Michigan." Again, trying to follow in your dad's footsteps. What's been the best part of fulfilling that dream?
I would say the best part about fulfilling the dream is just making my parents proud. I can see it year in and year out, especially this year being my last year at Michigan. They're getting a little more tears in the eyes, and at my games, and it's just so great having them on this journey with me. And I know my dad must be feeling some type of way, just because he was doing the same thing that I was doing. Number 97, captain. I mean, there's just so many similarities in our journey, and it's cool seeing them tear up a little bit at my accomplishments, and really just follow me on this journey.
You were talking about it earlier and how much this game means to you growing up in the state of Michigan, having friends who are Michigan State fans. What's your fondest memory of following Michigan football as a kid?
All right, do you mean in relation to Michigan State?
No, just in general. Like when you think back to, I'm a Michigan fan and this is why I'm a Michigan fan growing up, what do you think about?
Probably one game comes to mind. My dad was being honored as an honorary captain, and so I was probably like 11, and I got to go on the field. I got to go in the locker room. I met Michael Phelps on the sideline. There was a whole bunch of things that day, and it was just so cool to be in there and to imagine that my dad was in that locker room. He was on that field. All of that. So that was one of those. That was probably the most memorable day I had as a fan, just because I got that insider access. I got to see the locker room. I got to see the players. I mean, it was a really cool moment.
I want to ask you about one other thing from your youth, and maybe this contributes to being an athletic freak, because you talked about how nimble you are. You were a competitive dancer as a kid.
That's right.
Give me a sense of what that was about. What those competitions were like.
Oh, yeah, they were super competitive. Obviously, it's in the name, but you don't realize how competitive of a field that it is. And it was really fun. I was just out there, doing hip-hop. There was boys there. There was girls there. It was a really fun experience, and I do think that that did help me in the long run with my center of balance and my flexibility, and I could see it correlating to the whole freak athlete thing. So I think that the correlations are there for sure.
There are kids who are aspiring to play in the NFL listening to this right now, signing up online for dance lessons. If that can make me Aidan Hutchinson, then I'm going to do it. That's a pretty cool story.
That's right.
Let's get into this game. Michigan State's offense is incredibly explosive. What's the biggest challenge that they present?
I think the biggest challenge is that running back, Kenneth Walker. He's a beast. He can run the rock. He's got lateral quickness. He's got that ability to break tackles. He's just a really good back, and I think if we stop him on Saturday, we'll be very successful. But it all starts with stopping that run game and stopping Kenneth Walker.
Aidan, I'm going to leave you with this. It has been an amazing start for Michigan, but of course the most important chapters are still to be told here. To what extent do you believe this team's success this year will be measured by what happens Saturday and what happens against Ohio State?
I mean, that's right. You said it right there. We're 7-0, but I don't think many guys in our building care about that. We care about these next couple games. We care about beating Michigan State, and then after them, you know, we got a couple more games, but number one on our priority right now is beating Michigan State. And if we walk out of that locker room on Saturday 8-0, we're going to be extremely happy, and we're going to be moving on. And because we got goals that are bigger than this.
Aidan Hutchinson, congratulations on all of your successes, both on the field and in the classroom. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. Big Ten Tailgate presented by Tums on the road at Maryland this week. Andy Sabo and Brock Vereen on campus. Jerry, Joshua Perry, Howard Griffith and I will be here in studio all Big Ten, all morning long. Everything you need to know in advance of a huge Saturday in the conference, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We will, of course, have plenty to say about the Spartans and the Wolverines. This series, Michigan has dominated through the years, but one Michigan State has owned of late, winning 9 of the last 13, including last year in Ann Arbor. Been dead even in the Jim Harbaugh era, 3 wins apiece. And pleased now to be joined by Fox Sports lead game analyst Joel Klatt. He will be calling Michigan against Michigan State, noon Eastern Time on Saturday with Gus Johnson and Jenny Taft. Joel, I know you are fired up about this game. You called Michigan last week against Northwestern. Before we get to the matchup with the Spartans, interested in what your biggest takeaways were from seeing the Wolverines.
Yeah, I've seen them twice, actually, and saw them against Wisconsin earlier in their first road game of the season. Dave, I talked about this afterwards, but I didn't learn anything new about Michigan. The things that I felt really good about in terms of their team, they performed well. The things that I had question marks, those questions remained. And I'll walk through them. I knew that they were strong running the football, and they proved that out again. And they dominated a team in which they should dominate on the ground, because Northwestern came in with the league's last-ranked rush defense. And they dominated up front. I mean, terrific job, moving people off the ball. It didn't matter that their 2 starting guards were not playing. They had a couple of backups in there, and those guys, Chuck Filiaga and Carson Barnhart, did a great job. I knew that was going to happen. Defensively, I thought that this is a defense that is really good and maybe can have a big play because of eye discipline issues at times and give up a big play. That's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. They dominated the game outside of about 3 snaps, namely the Evan Hull run for, what was a 70-yard, 75-yard touchdown. Outside of that, the question marks that I have for Michigan really are surrounding their ability to be explosive on offense and their ability to shut down those explosive plays on defense. So they didn't throw the ball all that well last week. Cade McNamara took some shots deep down the field, but the ball placement wasn't where it needed to be. Are they going to need to go to J.J. McCarthy? Do they need to take the ceiling of their offense to the next level? Those are all questions that remain to be seen. And I think if you're being honest with yourself as a Michigan fan, you would have loved to have seen the passing game develop to a greater degree than it has going into this matchup. Now, Michigan State has one of the worst pass defenses in the Big Ten, and that should help. But where's the passing game for Michigan? I'm not sure where it's at. We've seen them throw the ball well against Wisconsin, and then last week against Northwestern, they just couldn't do it.
Yeah, about 5 yards per attempt against a defense that is not great. So to your point, there are definitely some question marks there. What intrigues you the most about this matchup? We talk a lot when these two get together. Whoever runs the ball better wins the game. It's been 45 of the last 51 games. How much will you be watching that? What are the other things that are the key factors in your mind as to who wins and who loses here?
I mean, you got to start with that one, right? I mean, because that's been such a key and is a key for both of these teams. They don't have a lot of offensive success if they're not able to establish the run game first. Even against Wisconsin for Michigan, Rev, they were committed enough that the flea flicker is what ultimately gave them a chance to get the ball down the field for a touchdown to Cornelius Johnson. That's what allowed them to settle in and throw the football a little bit better. Michigan State, they've got to run the football. Kenneth Walker's doing a heck of a job. Now, they're not quite as reliant on their run game as what Michigan is, because Peyton Thorne has shown the ability both with his legs and the ability to throw it out to really quality wide receivers. Jalen Naylor, Jaden Reed, these guys can go get it now, and they've got that ability. I think the one area, though, that people aren't talking about is the explosives. And that generally, to me, is where games like this are flipped. Because games like this tend to be tight. Field position becomes a huge factor. And it's generally 1, 2, or 3 snaps of the football that make all the difference in the world. And when you talk about that, it's generally explosive plays. Michigan State has been excellent generating explosive plays on offense. They do it through the passing game, through the run game. They do a nice job of that, partly because you've got to account for Kenneth Walker. Thorne can still get you with his legs, and they can go up and over the top to those wide receivers. What we haven't seen from Michigan is their ability to be explosive in the passing game. So that's one advantage that I would give the Spartans, and one area that I'd really watch for during the course of that game.
I do want to move on to Penn State and Ohio State. It is not as big a game as it seemed like it was going to be a week ago, given Penn State's loss. Let's start with the Nittany Lions. I mean, what do you take from them falling against Illinois?
Well, their offense just has not played well over the last few weeks, really. The health of Sean Clifford is paramount. That game against Iowa, which Gus and I called, I loved the game plan early. I thought they were playing their best game offensively that I had seen, whether it was on tape or live. Remember, I had seen them week 1 against Wisconsin up there in Madison. And I was like, okay, they've figured it out under Mike Yurcich. And then that injury just took them back to square one. So if Clifford's not healthy, they struggle moving the football, and it puts an immense amount of pressure on their defense, which I think is such a good unit. Now, when they lost P.J. Mustipher, that was a huge deal because he was really the cog stopping the run in the middle. The linebackers are great, but part of what made them great was the fact that P.J. Mustipher was so strong up there at the defensive tackle position. So when they lost him in that Iowa game, their defense took a little bit of a step back. And you can see that on film. They still should have beaten Illinois, though, at home. That's a game that's a bit of a head scratcher. I don't care what's going on health-wise. Penn State needs to take care of Illinois when they're at home. Maybe it was the look-ahead effect, but they ended up getting into overtime. You still got to find a way to win that game, and they weren't able to do it.
And now they head to Columbus. I mean, they haven't beaten a top 5 team on the road since 1994. This seems like a very challenging place for them to start. Ohio State has been fabulous offensively. I mean, it's amazing. You know, the last 156 plays with C.J. Stroud at quarterback, they have scored 150 points, according to Bill Landis of The Athletic.
Stupid good, right?
It's crazy good, right? It's remarkable. Let me ask you this, though. They have not played the best competition here of late. How much of it do you think is a function of who they've been playing? Okay,
so I think this is a great question because I'm asked this question all the time. And remember, in college, Rev, we have a greater disparity between even average teams and great teams, right? Wouldn't you agree? It's not like the NFL where you get a lot of like competition. So there's always this element of strength of schedule, or who did you beat, or but look at the teams that you're playing. My only answer to that is always, fine, are you doing to lesser competition what you should do? Okay? If you ask Oklahoma that, the answer is no.
Right.
They're playing down to their level of competition. All these one-possession games, you're down going into the fourth quarter against Kansas on the road. That's not what you're supposed to do to lesser competition. So I can derive that something's amiss within the program, whether it's leadership, schematics, something, right? Ohio State. So they play in the last 4 weeks against lesser competition. And what have they done? Exactly what they're supposed to do. What are you supposed to do against lesser competitions? Well, if you're a quarterback, throw for 14 touchdowns and no interceptions, check. Average over 340 yards passing the football, check. Travion Henderson scoring every 6 times he touches the ball, check. Averaging 10 yards a carry, check. Scoring 50 points a game, check. Number 2 scoring defense in the country over the last 4, only to Georgia, check. Number 2 yards per play defense in the country in the last 4, just to Georgia. Check. So I guess my answer is like, what else can they do? If that's going to be your excuse for why Ohio State is not strong, then there's nothing they can do until this week. And then I don't know how much you're going to give them credit for beating a Penn State team that just lost to Illinois and would be on their 3rd straight loss. So this is a chicken and an egg deal for me. What do you do in terms of relation to where your standard is? And their standard is clearly very high.
I want to leave you with this. A week from now, when we speak with you, we will have the first set of college football rankings. There is, of course, a weekend of games to come here, and there's the uncertainty that comes along with it, particularly in this season, which has been as wild as just about any we can remember, maybe outside of 2007. But that being said, let's say kind of form holds to some extent this weekend. What are the questions you're most looking forward to seeing answered by those first committee rankings?
Yeah, that also a great question. I just know that they are going to value Alabama and Ohio State very high because we can all use our 2 eyes and watch those 2 teams play. I think you would agree with me. So where that puts Oregon and the winner of Michigan State is fascinating to me, and Cincinnati to some degree. And I think what you're going to have is in the first iteration of these rankings, whoever wins this Michigan State matchup is going to be in the top 4. I believe Ohio State's going to be 5 or 6, pending a win against Penn State. And I think Oregon might even be right up there next to them or even 1 spot ahead of them because of that head-to-head victory. And I think you're probably going to see a situation where Cincinnati is getting the benefit of the doubt now, and eventually they will not. Eventually, they're going to start dropping down, in particular with 1-possession wins against teams like Navy, and it's going to be like a Baylor TCU from 2014 where they're in the top 4, and then at the very last second, they're out of the top 4 once those final rankings come out. That's my crystal ball. That's the way I'm kind of viewing this right now.
Hey, I know you've been looking forward to this game this weekend. We talked about a few weeks ago how much you were hoping you would get the opportunity to call it, and particularly with both of them undefeated in the top 10. Enjoy it, and look forward, along with you, to seeing how this one comes out. We'll talk to you next week, Joel.
Absolutely. Always great talking with you. Have a good day.